We started Sipsmith 7 years ago with a burning ambition of bringing back gin the way gin used to be made and the way gin should be made, ultimately bringing London dry gin back to the city where it earned its name. The story of gin in London is an extraordinary one. 1 in 4 houses in the city of London over 200 years ago had its own distilling apparatus. A series of different gin acts came in to stop that and it improved the landscape of gin distilling forever. A series of different new distilleries popped up. The last of those was in 1820. Fast forward 200 years and Sipsmith is the first distillery to launch since then, and we're incredibly proud. And having inherited those 200 years, we reflect that back in everything that we do here. And that is all because of one man, our master distiller, Jared Brown, and his brilliant craftsmen who create our London dry gin and other spirits on the 3 girls that really make the magic happen: prudence, patience, and constance.
Prudence was our first still. She joined us in 2009 when Gordon Brown was talking about the need for economic prudence. And our version of economic prudence was selling apartments to buy a gin still, to bring gin back to its birthplace here in London. To do that, we decided that we were not going to make a gin concentrate, as most people do, but to use a one-shot method in pure copper stills. Now, copper is a molecular filter. It binds with sulfur compounds and fatty acids, removing those from the distillate, so that what we get when it flows through is a much purer spirit. We take only a very narrow part of that distillate that comes off the still. We lose the first part, the heads, then we get into the hearts. That is the best of the spirit. That's what goes into the bottle. And then the tails, those also go away. But that heart cut in a one-shot method into a bottle where you get all of that just cut with a bit of water to bring it to bottling strength makes the best possible gin. It delivers our 10 traditional botanicals flawlessly. And it gives a very rounded mouthfeel and a phenomenal finish to a classic London dry gin. But this isn't where the true alchemy takes place in the Sipsmith distillery. That happens over here in the lab. This is where our recipe development takes place. The most important recipe, of course, is that of our London dry gin. When I created that, I began by looking for a benchmark London dry to compare it to. I quickly discovered that none of the classic London dries are made the way that they used to be. So in the absence of a benchmark, I had to set out to create one. I began with a recipe from 1736, when gin had 1 botanical in it: juniper. I worked forward through 9 formulas to get me up to the 1860s, where gin was perfected. There I found a dozen different gin styles. We can name 3 today: London Dry, Old Tom, and Plymouth. But at that time, they made table gin, cordial gin, fine cordial gin, cream of the valley, West Country gin. We made these to understand what dry gin was in historic context, and that led us to 10 essential botanicals. Here we have Orris fiorentina, the root of the Florentine iris flower, which brings in a violet character. We have cinnamon and cassia, close cousins, heat and complexity. The licorice root, which gives the perception of sweetness on the palate. And Russian coriander, a little bit of lemongrass in the finish, angelica root, the complexity of gin. Seville orange and lemon peel for that perfect dry citrus note, but most important of all, juniper, the heart and soul of London dry gin. And now we take those 10 classic botanicals and we load them into the copper pot still. We leave them overnight to macerate in our pure English wheat-based spirit. And then in the morning, turn on the still and let it warm very slowly. letting those vapors rise up from the pot into the helmet and then come across to the condensing coil where they become liquid again. This is where we collect the heart of the distillate that goes into the glass that I'd like to invite you to taste now. If you find there's too much collected alcohol vapors in the glass, you can clear that easily from the start by blowing in. That's all it takes. Then bring the glass up to your nose, but when you do, part your lips. That allows the vapors to reach both the orthonasal and the retronasal receptors, effectively allowing you to taste the aroma as you smell it. And here you find soft pine, sweet citrus, dry meadow flowers, some earthy notes, warm cinnamon coming through, finishes with character of lemongrass and pepper. That's the Russian coriander. I wanted citrus both at the beginning and the end, so I've got the Seville orange and lemon peels that come right up to greet you, and then that finish of the coriander. On the palate, exactly the same run of flavors, but also deep creaminess from that English wheat-based spirit. Chew it around like a wine and do as I'm about to do, enjoy it. And that is gorgeous London dry gin.
Well, not unremarkably, JB, we find ourselves behind the bar again, having visited the parts of the distillery and seen how you and your team make this epic gin. What are we using it for here today?
Oh, a couple of martinis, the classic, the drink that we made this gin for. Just to have a sip of a martini at the end of the day.
Absolutely. I think the martini is absolutely right. It's anchored in classicism, isn't it? And it's so sippable. And talking of sipping, the name Sipsmith actually came from Fairfax's father, who was a very well-known silversmith. And he said, you do the same thing with gin that I do with silver. I make it really fabulous things in smithery, and you do it with gin. And that makes you a Sipsmith, and that's exactly what we're doing today. So very happy sipping indeed.
Happy sipping.